We're going to start blocking out the interior of the mill using our proxy meshes that we created earlier. This will enable us to get a lot more detail and maintain very good gameplay metric friendly areas to move through. So I'm just isolating right now the meshes that make up our rough block out. And I'm going to start here by establishing just the foundational placement of meshes throughout this thing, including the floor, the walls, the overall shell to make sure it's properly aligned to the metrics we already set up for our proxies. Here I'm just duplicating the 4x4 floor mesh over and over again to establish kind of a nice grid, because all of our walls, or most of our walls and such, will be predicated on this grid and they will snap to it, so that we have things that are architecturally sound and we know that this is a good scale for gameplay. So I have like kind of a 9x5 grid of floor meshes now. And here I'm duplicating one of the floor meshes and I'm just switching it out for a shape cube mesh. Here I'm going to use this as a bit of articulation of the outside edges. This is going to be kind of a structural support. I'm not going to raise the whole thing up, but I'm going to take this one cube and extend it up so it forms sort of like a foundational pillar along each major edge of the entire mill building. So I have a couple there in the front. I have a couple there I'm adding to the sides. And that seems to be all right. Now I'm going to build out that front bit of detail here. I'm making kind of I don't say like a vestibule or like a more of an extruded entry area here, which will also be kind of a row of like workshops and offices on the upper levels of the mill building. So here I'm entering kind of a broad entrance because it's a main entrance to the building. I'm using the double width proxy meshes. You can see a lot of times as I'm adding these here, I'm sort of shift dragging them. I'm pressing Alt rather, and I'm dragging them to duplicate them so that they still are aligned in local space with the previous mesh next to them. And then I'll often swap them out for a new shape. Like instead of a 2x4, I'll swap them out to a 4x4, that kind of thing. It's just kind of a quick way of building. And again, I'm using my dev materials, which have a matching 1 meter grid all throughout. And here I'm just adding in like a facade with some windows. Again, it's all very easy to add because my meshes are all made to align with the grid. And this is the side of the building here, going with some 4x4s. I'm grabbing some of the floors here and adding a second floor very easily. I know, as we determined before, I know how high a story of the building is. It's 4 meter high wall and then it's 1 meter floor width. That's very easy and quick for me to add. And then here I'm just sort of rotating this mesh here to be kind of a filler mesh for the 1 meter high floor width. I'm just duplicating these and dragging them over. I'm only having one side of the building right now have windows. I may change this up later, but for now, the side without the water wheel on it, I'm leaving like it's kind of a wall without windows. Adding the indication of the third floor now up there. And then I'm adding in, again, this sort of this tall extruded area on the front of the building's facade. Like I said earlier, this could easily be set up for offices or workshops, that kind of thing. And it definitely adds some visual interest to the front of the building, beyond it being just kind of a straight up cube. Okay, so I'm shrinking up the pyramid shape meshes to form the sort of front facade of the roof. And I'm just changing my grid to a slightly smaller scale because I think the offset of the shape mesh is a little bit different than the proxies. And this is sort of the back wall, so to speak, of the same roof. And here I'm just going to use a shape mesh and sort of align it with the edges of the prism shape mesh so that I have this just shaped cube stretched out into just kind of the roof plane, really. Just keeping it simple, but still more recognizable as a roof. I had some little details like the roof overhang instead of a flat flush edge. And yeah, just making that a little more believable. And again, a lot of times these small details that I add are mainly there to really they're there a lot of times to convince people of the vision for the level, because that is kind of the designer's job. To some extent, the level designer's job is to establish that vision. Here I'm adding like a smaller outcropping roof. Just going to grab the top roof planes, align it with the front facade there, and shrink it up to match this smaller extrusion. That should work just fine. Again, just mixing up, like it's mostly proxy meshes, but mixing up a little bit with shape meshes. Okay, here I'm going to continue just alt dragging and duplicating the 4x4 wall mesh to the rear kind of sawmill area of the entire mill building. This is a good time to remember to make use of your layers tab here. Right now, I just grabbed all the meshes, the proxy meshes that I just added. Apparently I didn't select them all. And I'm adding them to my layers tab. The more complex your lockout gets, the more you're going to want to use layers. You can also group things, which I do when I have to move things all at once, but the layers tab is very helpful when things get complicated and you need to sort out all your meshes. Okay, so back again to the roof. I'm adding the sort of lower roof, the sawmill area again, where I'm adding this lower roof. I just kind of shift duplicated all this stuff here and just kind of aligning it with the edges of the back half of the sawmill, including these kind of structural supports on the edges of the building. Okay, now that we've established kind of the outer bounds of the building, we're going to take a look at kind of the interior machinery in the level here, mainly the gears and wheel systems that are built inside of a working water wheel mill. So we have to include these at this stage because all of our player paths will need to be built around this. We can't just wedge them in later, so we have to build them now. I'm placing just simple cylinder shape meshes here to indicate the gear wheel system. There are a bunch of interlocking gears that drive the sawmill equipment. So I'm putting them in now as an indicator of the footprint they have to take up. So we know as we build the player path through the level, we know the sort of immovable shapes that we have to build navigation around. So in this case, it's this series of gear wheels. So yeah, generally the gear system, according to my photo reference here, includes the water wheel itself, then kind of a central gear shaft, which is that vertical one to the right. And then this one here is linked via belts instead of gears to the system that actually drives the saws. So I'm just adding some supports here to indicate this stuff isn't floating in space. This machinery may not hold up to intense scrutiny by experts, but I feel like it's relatively plausible and it gives us a good idea of the footprint we need to build our level around. At this stage, we're going to do a quick playthrough in the editor. We're just going to reestablish our connection to the player experience and get a little bit out of our heads from the omniscient level designer perspective here, and just see if things are revealing to the player in the way that we want. So as we enter the building, we should have an experience of an environmental storytelling moment. We see the gears of the machinery. We understand this as a mill, as the player, but we also see what we have left to do. We have to do something that denies the player quick access to the back of the building. So we're going to work on that next. Since the building is kind of built into a high section and a low section, I'm going to add some walls in here, just duplicating the proxy meshes to figure out some kind of a barrier that splits the whole building interior in half. So the players they can see through the space, they can see some closed doors, some closed windows through these proxy meshes here. But we'll close these off with bars or something like that that allows the player to see through but not access. So we're denying them access here. And then we'll build the player path in kind of a circuitous route that allows them a more interesting path through the level and allows them a bit of problem solving to try to figure out a way to try to find the affordances that allow them to reach the next area of the mill. So again, I'm just adding in some duplicate reduced shape meshes here that are transformed into bars pretty much. And I think that does the job mostly of what we need there. So now I'm adding a little bit more detail here to the front of the building. As the player enters here, I'm thinking maybe they could have a workshop off to their left, or maybe a place where they check in when they go to work, that kind of thing. Just sort of workshop spaces so the whole area isn't just like one enormous warehouse. We want to subdivide it a little bit here. And these may be just optional spaces, really. They could tell the story of the way people lived and worked in the mill, the hierarchy of the space, really. But it also could be just interesting areas for exploration. Maybe there's sort of side areas to explore. Maybe there's, resources to be found in these areas. So we're just adding a little bit of interest here, subdividing the space in ways that achieves that goal. But it also does a job of occluding the player's view as they move through the space, giving them their path like an interesting shape. So right here, I'm kind of blocking their view to the left and the right, forcing them to move forward into the center of the space, and alternately maybe take a trip into one of those little side spaces if they want. And I'm going to place a staircase here. This is our first hint of an affordance. You can see in my camera actor view on the right-hand panel, you can see the very edge of the staircase. which is it's the hint that the player sees like, oh, maybe that's a way up. And then if they move forward, they find that yes, there is actually a winding staircase that goes around and up. Now I'm building into the upstairs area here. It's sort of the bounds of the upstairs area sort of has to be kind of based around where we want the player to go on the critical path through the level. So I have the stairs here. They kind of wind up around the central vertical gear shaft, which is kind of an interesting path to take. It provides some nice scenery, really, as they wind around it. I'm just kind of duplicating the floor that stretches across the width of the entire space here. It not only goes downstairs from here, but it also connects to other areas upstairs that are optional areas to explore. So once that's set up, I'm going to build a little more here to connect it to the upstairs area in the front of the building. Just duplicating the proxy floor mesh again, resizing it where necessary a little bit, trying to keep it whenever possible on the 1 meter grid. Seems to work okay. Now I'm going to add the staircase going into the other half, the sawmill part of the mill, the sort of work area. This is where the player would go downstairs after going upstairs around the central gear shaft. And this would take them to the area that's directly connected on the same floor plane as the exit to the bridge and the mill exit out the back of the building. So once this is set up, I'm going to build a little more occlusion here. This is also an interesting bit of foreshadowing. Like I don't want the players to just be able to jump down from this upper floor into the back half of the building. So I'm adding in more sort of barred windows, partially obscuring the view down, but allowing the player to sort of get a teasing glimpse of the exit from up here. I'm also going to do a little bit more work planning out how this machinery is set up. I'm adding in just a shape mesh here to indicate like a belt attached as part of a belt system to this drive wheel here. And I'm just kind of showing how these could be connected. Right now there's a wall in my way, so I'm going to have to sort of work with this wall and delete parts of it. Maybe turn it into more of a low fence. And again, this is where reality gets stretched a little bit. But this is the gear wheel driven cutting machine for logs. At least according to my photo reference, it is. So yeah, here I'm adding just like an axle between these two wheels. And I'm not getting into the heavy machinery of how this thing, there's some arms that connect to saw blades, but I'm not adding that in. I'm just trying to get a rough sense of the silhouette of this machine and how much space it takes up in the building and occludes the player's view of other things. It actually blocks the player's view of the exit when they come down the stairs next to it. So just adding some sort of structural supports, the gear wheels overhead, the logs will be beneath the gear wheel and the whole cutting assembly will be beneath the floor level. Just making some struts. Again, these are all just transformed cube-shaped meshes here. This is supported this way. Then I'm going to build sort of once I add like where I guess the saw blade might be, like I said, really rough indications here. I'm going to do a little bit of work to create some interesting floor barricades that might be used for crouch cover, but they're also used as kind of troughs that hold the logs in. Again, these are just ideas that came based on some photo reference, but we're just building them to a very specific scale using our grid system, using our dev materials. So we know like, okay, this is a crouch height wall that this trough is built to match gameplay metrics like crouch cover and stuff like that. So I'm going to build a few of these trough things to hold logs throughout the work floor here. I'm just kind of grouping and duplicating them here. They're going to kind of emerge out the back of the building, almost like garage doors. It would indicate the hierarchy of the space was built so that logs could kind of be delivered in the back of the building to the sawmill and then pushed out the other door. So here I'm establishing the entrance, the bridge, the sort of bridge gatehouse entrance to the exit bridge to the final objective. And I'm kind of aligning this with my staircase so that when the player comes down the staircase into this work area, they have this kind of direct line of sight to the exit here. We want them to see the sort of the locked door that they're going to encounter first before they see, hopefully, the exit out the back of the building. So I'm just kind of building this into like, again, like almost like a little, I don't know, a little vestibule or a little subdivided house here. And now we can see how these structures here, I'm using these, like I said, as my kind of log troughs. And I'm just sort of angling them down. Again, this is just stuff I saw based on a lot of photo reference. It's all a lot of ramps and pulleys, and these could even be like conveyor belts. Some of them, like actually, they are kind of conveyor belts, to be honest, where the logs are kind of pushed along the ramps like that. Just adding more ramps to explain how it is. Now I'm going to use some proxy meshes and rescale these doorways a little bit wider. I'm going to go with like a 1.5 meter wide doorway, so they seem more like garage doors, kind of. Next to these garage doors, we're going to add a single width door. This would be where the workers entered and exited the mill building, and this is where the player will exit when they journey up to the church building in the distance. So we're going to have to do a little bit of resizing at some sort of unusual height dimensions here to sort of fill up this facade and seal it off. The building required some unusual height dimensions, being an industrial odd-sized building, so we're just going to have to adjust for that a little bit here. After building this whole structure with a 1 meter high foundation, I discovered that it doesn't really align at the same height level as the building in the distance, the goal building. So I'm taking the bridge and all the related geo and just moving it up 1 meter so it matches the floor height of the building in a real smooth way. One of those things that comes clear a little bit later. It's not too big of a deal. Here I'm adding an indication that this is a locked door that can be opened by a key later. I'm using the color red in this material instance to indicate that as the design intention. It matches the color scheme we kind of established earlier in the original level design document. And here is an open door. This would conceivably be something the player could open right away. It wouldn't be just, I'm opening right now for the sake of running through the level, but I'm going to color this green to show that it's an interactable door that's already unlocked. So the player would press a button to interact with it and it would open. Since we don't have the actual scripting done yet in this level, I'm just indicating it with green. So here I'm going on now and I'm indicating, again, some more justification for these things. And not only that, we also need to block the player's path. We don't want to have them jump out of those garage doors. So here we're adding in just cylinder shaped meshes as placeholder for the logs that would have been driven in by log trucks and etc. to be dealt with and chopped up here in the sawmill. So we're just adding these. We could add more, but for now it blocks the player's path pretty well. So to take a quick break and play through the level, I'm going to move my player start to the front of the building and add a small staircase, which would make sense at the front of a building. We're going to add that in and just see how this level plays from here. Okay, so we start off here at the facade. We have some staircases going in. We see our staircase leading us up. We see a blocked off section beyond. This wall here shows us the industrial section beyond. We can't go through there. We're forced to find a way around it. The staircase leads us up and around. If we go up here, it seems like the staircase is a little narrow. Should probably make that wider. We don't want to fall down there. There's a place that we can see through, sort of teasing us of the things that we'll discover in the next area. If there's enemies sort of patrolling down there, that could be kind of an interesting area to get a glimpse of what's to come. If this were a combat area, these troughs would serve as pretty good cover. We have a straight shot view right to our exit door right here, marked in red. So the player can find the locked door. Then they can leave out the back door here. And here they have a reveal and an image composition of their next location to reach, the town hall. So based on our playthrough, I'm going to make some small adjustments to the interior. These staircases prove to be a little too narrow for comfort. 3 meters seems better, so I'm going to add that in. I'm also going to go and flesh out some of the sort of optional areas as well, including some of the workshop / like office-y areas that I mentioned earlier. To add a little more areas for exploration in the upstairs and also help flesh out the building as seeming more like a functional space, really. This is the kind of thing where later on, like a lot of prop work could be done by the artist to explain what these buildings are. Also need to flesh out additional staircases. Like if we do want the player to reach the upstairs, we need to add a staircase in a pretty believable manner. This works pretty well. It matches the floor heights according to the metrics we established earlier for our architecture. So it seems to work out all right. If it became necessary later on where this was too much, it was like having this much exploration wasn't really good for the length of gameplay or any other reason, we could easily just like have one of these staircases be destroyed, because this is, after all, like a partially broken, derelict kind of mill. It is abandoned, so we could just destroy it in other ways. Opening up a bit of geometry here around the stairs and sort of fixing up sort of the interior structures near the roof Just a little bit of adjustment there so we can plan out exactly where our wall is located here. Again, we don't want the player to be able to enter the lower portion of the mill from the top floor either. So I'm just sort of figuring out how to align the roof here with the floor, with the walls that separate the spaces. Things aren't quite aligned, but I think they're aligned mostly fine for what we want. I'm adding some indications of where railings might be. I'm just adding in, at this point, just low, like 1 meter high walls or that kind of thing, and just sort of aligning them around the edges of the open space so that people, if they were working here, they could see down amongst the gears. The player could see down amongst the gears, but it's also not just like kind of a jumping fest where the player can fall through into unwanted spaces. We want to try to build this in a way that's believable, but it also constrains the player to areas that are easily navigated using our movement mechanics here. Also doing a little work as well on creating fixtures that support the gear system inside the building. These I'm just attaching to the roof because I think it works better attached to the roof than the floor. I don't want to really add too much clutter to the floor. So I'm taking some liberties again with photo reference here, but generally speaking, I think it still remains pretty grounded. Attaching the top of this vertical axle here to some struts in the roof that were added to hold it in place. There's a certain bit of fudging that goes on here, but I feel like if you find enough examples to explain what you want, then you can get away with industrial type building of many different varieties. That's kind of why industrial buildings are so great for both level design and for movies, is they can justify all kinds of very specific set arrangements that might be needed for telling a story or telling gameplay. Yes, okay, here I'm just sort of building some struts to sort of explain how this is connected to the infrastructure of the building, adding some more railings around the open space here as well, so that this all is connected and all flows pretty well and has some smooth movement throughout. I'm also going to add in, we're missing some floors here for these sort of interiors. I just quickly added floors to the second and third. And I'm just duplicating that open sort of area from below so it duplicates on both sides. So, okay, we're going to do a playthrough of this now. We're going to run in through the front facade. We have our reveal of the gears. We have our denied view of the spaces beyond. So we can see that there's also a way to the top floor when we go that way. If we choose to go that way, we still have our view of the area beyond. Probably want to block off this area right here so I can't fall down into the machine. So based on that playthrough, we could use a little refinement here. Things are still a little too occluded. The view of the area that we're being denied access to, the sawmill area, I think it could probably be a little less noisy. So I'm deleting some of these bars, making it a little more visible through the windows, through these sort of gates here on the ground floor. I think that'll work out a little better and allow the player like a sneak peek of the gameplay and the exploration that's to come. One thing that's occurring to me at this stage is how the sawmill area could use a little more detail to be more in line with sort of a realistic sawmill, which is they let a lot of natural light in for work purposes. So we're going to add some really tall open windows to the back of the sawmill to reflect that kind of architecture.